The Sunday sunlight came through my parents' kitchen windows in long golden strips, warm enough to make the room look harmless. It wasn't. My father sat at the head of the oak table with both hands wrapped around his coffee mug, like he was chairing a meeting instead of waiting to explain why my certified mail had been opened in his house. My mother sat to his right, spine straight, lipstick perfect, fingers folded so tightly in her lap that even from across the table, I could see the strain in her knuckles. Greg had taken the chair nearest the doorway, one leg bouncing under the table in that restless way he got when he knew a conversation was about to go badly, but still planned to blame me for it. And in front of me, laid neatly beside the sugar bowl, like it belonged there, was the opened envelope. My envelope. The certified one from work. The flap had been sliced clean across the top and folded back down as if neatness could make it legal. A yellow sticky note clung to the front in my mother's careful blue handwriting. "We'll talk Sunday. Love, Mom." Underneath the note, visible through the half-open flap, was the letter itself, and around the response deadline, in thick blue ballpoint, my mother had drawn a perfect circle. I looked at that circle for a long moment before I looked at any of them. Then I asked the only question that mattered. "So which one of you decided my career was a family vote?" The room went still, not shocked still, prepared still, the kind of silence people wear when they've already rehearsed their reasons and are just waiting to see which one they'll need first. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. I'm Tori, 33, and I work in real estate closings, which means I spend my days making sure the right people sign the right documents and nobody gets a key they aren't supposed to have. This is the story of the one key I handed over myself, the job offer it almost cost me, and the Sunday morning I finally understood that love and entitlement can wear the exact same face until one of them opens your mail. 2 years earlier, a pipe burst under my kitchen sink while I was 4 hours away in Louisville, trying to keep a commercial closing from collapsing. Water was pouring into the cabinet base, soaking the hardwood I'd saved up almost 3 years to install. My parents were closest. They rushed over, shut off the main valve, hauled out the wet towels, and saved the floor before the damage spread. That night, exhausted and grateful, I handed my father a spare key. "For emergencies," I said. He turned it over in his hand, smiling in that calm, satisfied way he always did when something had been settled exactly the way he thought it should be. "Good," he said. "That's how it ought to be." At the time, I thought he meant the emergency. I know now he meant the access. For a while, the key seemed harmless. Useful, even. My mother would drop off casseroles when I worked late. She'd leave a sticky note in the fridge. "Figured you skipped dinner again? Love you." Sometimes I'd come home and find the dishwasher emptied or a stack of clean towels folded on the counter. I told myself it was kindness because I wanted it to be kindness. I was 33, single, working 12-hour days, and there was something comforting about opening the fridge and finding baked ziti from the woman who still thought feeding me was a solution to anything life broke. Then the small things started. The dish rack got rearranged. The thermostat would be bumped from 68 to 71 because, according to my mother, nobody thinks clearly in a cold house. My winter coats migrated from the bedroom closet to the hall closet without my asking. A junk drawer I kept deliberately messy for chargers and receipts came back sorted into sandwich bags by category. None of it was dramatic enough to justify a fight. That was the problem. Boundary violations are easy to ignore when they arrive disguised as help, and I was very good at ignoring things that would make other people uncomfortable if I named them out loud. I was the oldest daughter in a family that had quietly assigned me the role of dependable before I was old enough to drive. I handled things. I drove Grandpa to dialysis when Greg forgot. I proofread insurance forms for my parents because Dad hated paperwork. I co-signed Greg's first apartment when his credit was a mess, and he swore he'd pay me back in 6 months. Being capable had become the family's favorite thing about me, mostly because capable people are easy to lean on and hard to feel guilty about. So when I finally asked my mother to call before she came over, I did it gently. "Mom, I love the food," I told her over the phone one Tuesday, standing in the parking lot outside work. "But I need you to check with me before you use the key, even if I'm not home." There was a pause. Not a confused pause, a rearranging her face pause. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, soft as frosting. I'm only tidying. I just like knowing you're coming home to something nice. I know, I said, and I appreciate it. I just want a heads up. Of course, she said quickly. Of course. Nothing changed. The casseroles kept appearing. The towels kept getting refolded. My coffee mugs switched cabinets because apparently they belonged closer to the dishwasher. I'd leave for work with one version of my house and come home to another, each change tiny enough to make me feel ridiculous for noticing and persistent enough to make me feel crazy when I tried not to. By spring, my work was the only place that still felt fully mine. I was lead escrow officer on the biggest file our branch had touched all year, a 4-property commercial closing with a seller who treated deadlines like insults and a lender who kept forgetting to wire corrected documents until the last possible second. I was good at that kind of pressure, precise, calm, the person people called when something complicated needed to be made orderly. A week before everything exploded, our regional vice president, Renata Voss, pulled me aside after a meeting and asked if I had 5 minutes. Renata is the kind of woman who doesn't waste praise on people she doesn't mean to invest in. Mid-50s, immaculate suits, silver hair cut in a sharp bob, eyes that miss nothing. We're opening a Tennessee branch, she said, closing the conference room door behind us. Lead escrow manager. Your name is at the top of my list if you want it. I remember just staring at her. More money, my own team, a relocation package, a title with some actual authority attached to it. I had worked for every inch of the career I had, and suddenly there was a door opening into a bigger one. Yes, I said before she'd even finished laying out the basics. Yes, I want it. Good. She smiled, brief and satisfied. The formal offer will come by certified mail. Watch your mailbox. I laughed. I actually laughed, because what kind of person hears watch your mailbox and thinks, I should probably make sure my mother isn't intercepting my future? 3 days later, I flew to Illinois for a closing that should have taken 1 day and turned into 3 because the buyer's attorney discovered a title defect at the 11th hour and decided panic was a negotiation strategy. I barely slept, barely ate, and spent most of that trip inside a gray conference room trying to keep 6 irritated adults from blowing up a multi-million-dollar deal. On the second afternoon, my mother left me a voicemail. Her voice was bright in that brittle, over-careful way it gets when she's already done something she knows I won't like and is hoping tone alone can carry her through it. Hi, honey, it's Mom. Listen, something came for you, certified. I signed so it wouldn't go back to the post office. Don't worry, we'll talk when you're home. Love you. I listened to it twice in the hallway outside the conference room, my stomach tightening a little more each time. Certified. We'll talk. I tried calling her back, no answer. I told myself it could be anything. A tax notice, insurance paperwork, something from the county, but deep down I already knew. Renata's voice had come back to me the second I heard the words certified. Watch your mailbox. I got home late Saturday night. The house was too clean, not tidy, not nice. Clean in that staged, overmanaged way that makes a place feel less like a home and more like a model unit waiting for a showing. The throw pillows on the couch had been karate chopped into stiff little triangles. My counters gleamed. A vase of carnations sat on the table even though I never bought cut flowers because I think they look like an apology trying too hard. There was a note on the fridge. Welcome home, sweetheart. Come by Sunday morning. The 4 of us need to talk. Don't be upset. We did it out of love. Mom. The 4 of us. Not call me. Not we should discuss something. A meeting had been scheduled in my life without my consent. I dropped my suitcase by the door and went straight to the kitchen counter where I always leave my mail. The stack was there, squared so neatly it looked measured. On top sat grocery flyers and a utility bill. Underneath were 3 envelopes with flaps that had been opened and pressed shut again. I could see it immediately. The slight gray pull where adhesive had been lifted and relaid, the tiny misalignment at the seam, and there near the bottom was the certified envelope. My name on the front, my company's return address in the corner, the green signature card still clipped to the back, the flap cut open. I pulled the letter out with hands that had gone completely steady. Lead escrow manager, Tennessee branch, salary, benefits, relocation support, everything I'd hoped for, everything I'd worked for. And around the deadline to respond, my mother had drawn that blue circle like I was a child who needed reminding to turn in a permission slip. A yellow sticky note clung to the front page. "We'll talk Sunday. Love, Mom." I sat at my own kitchen table with my own future in my hands and realized my family had already started discussing whether I should be allowed to take it. I didn't sleep much that night. By morning, I had one decision made and one still hanging in the air. The first was that I was going to my parents' house. The second was whether I would leave there with my temper or my dignity. As it turned out, I almost lost both. By the time Sunday sunlight spilled across my mother's table, the coffee had been poured, the letter was waiting beside the sugar bowl, and my father had already decided this was going to be a conversation about family. He was wrong. It was a conversation about ownership, and I was done pretending those were the same thing. "So," I said again, looking at the blue circle on the page and then at all three of them, "which one of you is going to explain why my career offer ended up opened, read, and discussed in this kitchen before I ever got to see it?" The key sat in my palm the whole drive home. Cold, small, ordinary. It looked exactly the same as it had the night I gave it to my father after the pipe burst under my sink. Back then, it had felt like gratitude. Now it felt like evidence. I parked in my driveway and sat there for a full minute without getting out. My parents' house was only 12 minutes away, but it felt like I had crossed a state line. Maybe I had. Maybe there was a version of family on one side of that drive and a different version on the other. When I finally stepped inside, the house was too quiet. Not peaceful quiet, staged quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like a room after an argument, even when no one else is there. I locked the door behind me and dropped my purse on the kitchen counter. My mother's note was still on the table where I'd left it the night before. The yellow sticky note with her round blue handwriting still attached to the certified envelope. "We'll talk Sunday. Love, Mom." I stared at it for a second, then reached into my pocket and set the spare key down right on top of the note. Metal over paper, boundary over guilt. Then I picked up my phone and called the first locksmith that answered. He said he could come Monday morning. I booked it before I could talk myself out of it. After I hung up, I stood in the middle of my kitchen and looked around properly for the first time. Once you know someone has crossed a line, you start seeing all the footprints that led there. The dish towel hanging from the oven handle wasn't mine. It was one of my mother's, white with tiny stitched lemons in the corners. She must have brought it over with the casserole and forgotten to take it back, or maybe left it on purpose, a flag planted in a room she thought still answered to her. The stack of mail was squared too perfectly. My coffee pods had been arranged by flavor. The little ceramic bowl where I dropped my rings after work had been moved from the right side of the sink to the left, where my mother always said it made more sense. None of it was dramatic. That was what made it dangerous. If someone had smashed a window or stolen jewelry, I would have known exactly what to call it. This was softer than theft and somehow more intimate. This was someone editing my life in tiny strokes and calling it care. I took the key from the table and locked it in my desk drawer for the night. I didn't want to look at it anymore. Then I opened my laptop and read the offer letter again. Lead escrow manager, Tennessee branch. The salary was higher than anything I'd ever made. There was a relocation stipend, a housing allowance for the first 3 months, and a note from Renata herself in the body of the email saying they were thrilled to have me. The deadline to accept was now less than 48 hours away. I should have felt excited. Instead, I felt watched, like the letter wasn't mine anymore because too many other hands had already touched it. I closed the laptop and went to bed, but I didn't sleep much. Every creak of the house sounded personal. At 3 a.m, I got up, checked the deadbolt, then checked it again. I stood in the dark kitchen staring at the back door and thinking about how easy it had been for my parents to come in here while I was gone. How easy it had been for them to move through my rooms, read my mail, decide what my life should look like, and still believe they were the generous ones. By sunrise, I had stopped trying to sleep. The locksmith arrived at 9 sharp. His name was Dale, late 50s, gray beard, quiet voice. He looked like a man who had seen a lot of messy reasons for changing locks and had learned not to ask too many questions unless the customer offered them. He stood on my porch holding a black toolbox and glanced at the old brass deadbolt. "Same key all around?" he asked. "Not anymore." He nodded like that told him everything he needed to know. I stood nearby while he worked. He unscrewed the old lock in pieces, setting each part carefully on a folded rag. The deadbolt came out first, then the knob lock. He replaced both with a matte black set and tested them twice before handing me 2 fresh keys on a plain silver ring. "Want to keep the old hardware?" he asked. I looked down at the worn brass cylinder in his hand. The lock my parents had keys to, the lock that had let my mother stand in my kitchen and open a letter addressed only to me. "No," I said, "you can toss it." He smiled a little like he'd heard that tone before. When he left, the house felt different immediately. Not healed, not safe exactly, but mine. I locked the front door, unlocked it, then locked it again just to feel the mechanism catch. A small sound, a satisfying one. My phone rang before I could even put the keys down. Ranata. I answered on the second ring. "Tori, tell me you got the letter," she said without preamble. "I got it." "Good, because I need your answer by tomorrow afternoon. I've got corporate asking for final confirmations, and I'm trying very hard not to let them pressure me into moving on to the next candidate." My stomach dropped. Tomorrow afternoon, not the end of the week, not a few more days, tomorrow. Because of my trip and because my mother had sat on the letter for 3 days, half my decision window was already gone. I gripped the counter with my free hand. "I'll have an answer today." That's what I wanted to hear. Her voice softened a little. "Tori, I mean this. You earned this role. Don't overthink it." After we hung up, I stood very still in my kitchen. You earned this role, not your family, not your father's worries, not your mother's casseroles, not Greg's convenience, mine. I pulled out a chair, opened my laptop, and started typing my acceptance email. I got as far as "Dear Renata, I'm honored to accept." The doorbell rang. I froze. For one ridiculous second, I thought maybe Dale had forgotten a tool. Then the bell rang again, shorter this time, followed by a knock I knew in my bones. My mother's knock was always too gentle to be called pounding, but too insistent to be mistaken for patience. I walked to the door and looked through the side window first. There she was. Cream cardigan, pearl earrings, a casserole dish balanced in one hand, like a peace offering she fully expected to be invited in with, and in the other hand, another envelope. My pulse started thudding in my ears. I opened the door but didn't step aside. Mom's eyes immediately dropped to the new deadbolt. I watched her notice it, watched the understanding travel across her face in one small, tight movement. "Tori," she said softly. I didn't answer that. I looked at the casserole, then the envelope. "What is that?" She tried a sad smile that didn't quite land. "I brought lunch, and this came yesterday. It looked important, so I thought I should bring it over myself." "Important enough to open?" Her face changed, just slightly. Enough. The envelope was from my bank, and the flap had already been slit. My mother stepped inside before I answered. Not all the way, just enough to clear the threshold. Casserole dish balanced in one hand, the opened bank envelope in the other. Like if she moved carefully enough, it wouldn't count as crossing another line. I shut the door behind her and stayed where I was. "What did you open?" Her face tightened. "Tori, please don't start like this." "Then answer the question." She looked down at the envelope, then back at me with the expression she always wore when she wanted to be seen as the reasonable one. "It was from the bank. I thought maybe it was fraud or some issue with the mortgage, and I didn't want you blindsided while you were already upset." The thing about people who cross boundaries for years is that eventually they stop lying convincingly. They get lazy. They assume the story doesn't have to make sense because they've trained everyone around them to accept the emotional version of events instead of the factual one. I held out my hand. She gave me the envelope. The flap had been slit cleanly, just like the offer letter. Inside were 3 pages from my bank, clipped together with a printed note from a loan officer I recognized. I skimmed the first paragraph and felt my stomach drop. It wasn't just a statement, it was a notice about my pre-approval file, a larger mortgage amount, a relocation loan review, exactly the paperwork I had quietly started for Tennessee in case I decided to buy instead of rent. My mother had opened documents that included my balances, my debt ratio, and the amount I had been approved to borrow. I looked up at her. "You read my financial records." We were worried. Your father, Greg, me, we all talked about it after the offer letter came. There it was, the committee, the same invisible board of directors that had apparently been meeting about my life without my consent. I set the casserole dish down on the counter harder than I meant to and pulled out the papers again. There were my savings figures, my credit line, a typed note from the loan officer about income verification tied to a Tennessee relocation package. Everything someone would need if they wanted to decide whether I could handle moving away. I laughed once, a short, sharp sound. "You sat around discussing my bank information?" My mother's eyes filled, but I was past caring. "We're scared for you," she said. "You work all the time, you barely sleep, and now you're talking about taking on a bigger mortgage in another state where you don't know anyone. We had to look at the full picture." "No," I said quietly. "You wanted control of the full picture." Her mouth trembled. That used to work on me. I used to see my mother cry and immediately start editing myself down to something easier for her to bear. Softer voice, smaller truth, faster apology. Standing in my kitchen with my private loan documents in my hands, I felt something different. Not cruelty, not even anger exactly. Clarity. I walked to the table, opened my laptop, and sat down. "What are you doing?" she asked. I didn't look up. "Accepting the job." Her breath caught. "Tori." I clicked into the draft email I'd started before she rang the bell. My fingers moved faster now. "Dear Ranita, I'm thrilled to formally accept the position of lead escrow manager for the Tennessee branch." My mother came around the edge of the table. "Tori, please, just slow down and think. Once you send that, everything changes." I hit send before she finished the sentence. The whoosh of the email leaving my outbox was one of the most satisfying sounds I've ever heard. For a second, the room went completely still. My mother stared at the screen, then at me. "You already sent it?" "Yes." "Tori." "No." I closed the laptop and looked at her directly. "You don't get to use my fear as a waiting room while the family votes on my future." Tears spilled down her face. "We only wanted what was best." I stood up. "You don't get to decide what's best for me by opening my mail?" She looked suddenly smaller, but not small enough to make me forget what she had done. There was a long silence. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "I wasn't going to show you this yet." The sentence made every muscle in my body go tight. She laid the paper on the table between us. It was a printed screenshot of an email. My email. One I had sent to my loan officer 2 weeks earlier asking about financing options if I accepted the Tennessee role. At the bottom, in my mother's blue pen, she had written one sentence. This is what made us realize how serious this was. I stared at the page, then at her. "How did you get that?" Her silence answered before her mouth did. I thought of my office, my laptop on the desk, my file drawer, the nights I'd come home and felt that tiny, unprovable shift in the room. Not just mail, not just papers, access, repeated access. "You went through my office. Tori, you went through my computer?" "No, not your computer, I swear." Her hands flew up, panicked now. The email was printed. It was in a folder. A folder. I felt suddenly cold, because I knew exactly which folder she meant. The blue one in my office drawer, the one where I kept pre-approval paperwork, property notes, and a handful of private documents I never expected anyone else to touch. I looked at the page again. My own email, printed and annotated by my mother like she was grading an assignment. "How long?" I asked. She blinked. "How long have you been going through my office?" Her lips parted, closed, then quietly. "Since the spring." The room went silent. Since the spring, not one bad week, not one overreaction to Tennessee. Months. Months of my parents letting themselves into my house, opening my office, reading my documents, and deciding which parts of my adult life needed supervision. My throat tightened, but my voice came out steady. "Leave. Tori, please, leave the casserole, leave the envelope, and leave my house." She stood there for a second, crying openly now, as if she were the one being turned out of somewhere she loved. Then she picked up her purse, looked once at the new deadbolt on the door, and walked out without another word. I locked the door behind her and stood there listening to her car pull away. Then I turned back toward my office. Because if my mother had been going through my files since spring, then the offer letter and the bank envelope weren't the whole story. Not even close. I went straight to the file cabinet and started pulling everything out. Tax records, property folders, insurance binders, old closing packets. At first it just looked messy. Then I found my mortgage statement. My original mortgage statement for this house. And in the margin, in my mother's careful blue handwriting, were 5 words that made my blood run cold. Too much house for one person. I sat down on the floor with the mortgage statement in my hands and read my mother's handwriting 3 times. Too much house for one person. Below it, in the same careful blue ink, better to stay local. Talk to Greg about co-signing if she insists on buying in Tennessee. For a moment I couldn't move. I just stared at the page and let the shape of those words settle into something real. My mother hadn't simply read my mail. She hadn't simply opened a folder because she was worried. She had been planning, evaluating, making notes in the margins of my life like I was a file on her kitchen counter instead of a grown woman with her own house, her own salary, and her own future. I kept digging. The folder labeled Tax Records 2024 had been put back out of order. Behind it, I found a printed copy of my Tennessee offer letter, one I knew I had never left on the kitchen counter or in the open. It had come from my office drawer. The top page was clean, but the second page had a faint indentation across the margin, like someone had rested a pen there while thinking. I held it up to the light. Indented into the paper, almost invisible unless you knew to look, were 3 words. She'll regret this. My hands went cold, because that wasn't worry anymore. That wasn't tidying. That wasn't even meddling. That was intent. I pulled out the rest of the drawer and found my old journal shoved near the front where I would never have kept it. The elastic band around it was stretched wrong, like someone had opened it in a hurry and tried to close it back the way they found it. I opened to the middle. 2 pages had been folded down at the corners. Both entries were from months earlier. One was about how trapped I felt in my town, how every week seemed to belong to someone else before it belonged to me. The other was a late-night entry after a fight with Greg, where I wrote that sometimes I felt less like a daughter and more like the family's backup generator, only noticed when the lights went out. At the bottom of that page, in blue ink I knew too well, a line had been written in the margin. You've always been dramatic when you're tired. I actually stopped breathing for a second. My mother had read my private journal, not skimmed it, read it closely enough to answer me inside it. The room around me went very still. Every casserole, every folded towel, every little I was only helping. All of it snapped into place at once. This wasn't kindness that had wandered too far. This was surveillance with a casserole dish. I took out my phone and started photographing everything. The mortgage statement with her notes, the journal page, the printed offer letter, the bank envelope, the yellow sticky note from the certified mail. I laid each item flat on the rug and took clear, time-stamped photos like I was building a file for a client who didn't yet understand how bad their case was. Then I emailed every image to my personal backup account and uploaded copies to a cloud folder I'd never shared with anyone. Only after I finished did I call Greg back. He answered like he'd been waiting for it. You calmed down? I looked at the journal page in front of me. No. A pause. Then he sighed, already exhausted by a problem he had helped create. Tori, Mom's really upset. Good. That's not fair. I laughed, but there was nothing funny in it. Fair? Greg, she read my mortgage paperwork. She read my journal. Silence. Not shocked silence, not confused silence. The kind of silence that means the person on the other end already knew more than they were hoping to admit. I stood up slowly. How long have you known? It wasn't like that. How long? He exhaled hard. Dad asked me to look at the Tennessee paperwork once. That's it. Once. People always say once when they want credit for not saying often. I walked to the kitchen and braced one hand on the counter. You helped them go through my files. I helped them understand what they were looking at. He snapped back, defensive now. because none of us could tell how serious it was. You weren't talking to anyone. You were about to buy property, move 6 hours away, take on debt, and that gave you permission to break into my office? It's not breaking in if it's family. That sentence hit harder than anything else he'd said, because there it was, the whole rotten belief underneath everything. That blood erased locks, that concern erased consent, that family turned trespassing into a favor. I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them. The bank contacted me this morning. Greg went quiet. I kept going. My pre-approval has been flagged. Someone called and raised concerns about my financial stability tied to the move. He didn't answer, didn't deny it, and suddenly I didn't need him to. I already knew. Did Dad make that call? I asked, or did you? Another long pause, then carefully, Dad just wanted them to slow the process down until you came to your senses. I gripped the edge of the counter so hard my fingers hurt. There are moments when anger feels hot and wild, like a fire. This wasn't that kind. This was colder, sharper, the kind that clears your vision instead of blurring it. My father had called my bank and interfered with my financing. My mother had read my journal and written in it. My brother had helped them read Tennessee paperwork and was still standing there calling it family. I looked around my kitchen, my spotless counters, my mother's lemon dish towel still hanging from the oven, the house they kept insisting they only wanted to protect, and felt something inside me settle. Not forgiveness, not grief, decision. Greg, I said very quietly, tomorrow night all of you are coming to my house. For what? So I can explain exactly what happens next. Tori, no casseroles, no tears, no speeches about family, just come. I hung up before he could answer. Then I walked over to the oven, took my mother's lemon dish towel off the handle, and dropped it straight into the trash. After that, I sat down at the kitchen table, opened a blank document, and typed the title across the top like I was preparing closing papers. Boundary violations, documentation timeline. If my family wanted to turn my life into a committee meeting, then tomorrow night I was going to hand them the minutes. Greg arrived at 6:53, 3 minutes early, like he thought punctuality might earn him credit. I watched his sedan pull into my driveway through the front window, headlights sweeping across the living room wall, and felt nothing but a strange, cold steadiness. By 7, my parents' car rolled in behind him. My mother got out first, clutching her purse with both hands like she was walking into a funeral. My father came around the hood slower, jaw set, shoulders squared, already wearing the expression he used whenever he planned to call something a misunderstanding, until everyone else got tired enough to let him. I had spent the last 2 hours turning my kitchen table into an evidence board. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just organized. The open, certified envelope with my mother's sticky note, the bank papers, the mortgage statement with her handwriting in the margins, the journal page, printed screenshots of the photos I'd taken, each one labeled with the date and where I found it. And at the center, in a clean stack, a document I'd typed myself. Boundary violations, documentation timeline. I didn't want a family argument, I wanted a record. When the doorbell rang, I opened it and stepped aside just enough to let them in, but not enough to feel welcoming. Greg came first, eyes flicking around the room like he was looking for the safest chair. My mother followed, taking in the new locks, the cleaned-off counters, the table full of documents. Her face changed the second she saw the journal page sitting there in plain view. My father noticed it too, but his expression didn't crack. He looked at the table the way a man looks at a bill he doesn't intend to pay. Sit, I said. No one argued. They took the 3 chairs opposite me. For one strange second, it really did feel like a closing table. Papers laid out, parties seated, everyone pretending this was still a negotiation when the signatures had already told the truth. I stayed standing. I'm going to say this once, I said, and then you're going to listen without interrupting. Dad opened his mouth. I held up a hand. No, you've all had months to talk about me behind my back. You can give me 10 minutes to talk in front of you. That shut him up. I picked up the certified envelope first. This, I said, holding it up, was a job offer addressed to me. Mom, you signed for it while I was out of town. You opened it, you read it. Then you brought it to your kitchen and decided the four of you needed to discuss whether I should take it. My mother's eyes filled immediately. We were worried. I looked at her once. She stopped. I set the envelope down and picked up the bank papers. This was next. My financial records, my pre-approval file, my debt ratio, my balances, all opened and discussed because apparently my career move also gave you the right to audit my life. Greg rubbed a hand over his face. Dad folded his arms. Then I picked up the mortgage statement. The one with my mother's handwriting. Too much house for one person, I read aloud. Better to stay local. Talk to Greg about co-signing if she insists on buying in Tennessee. My mother made a soft, wounded sound in the back of her throat. I ignored it. And then there's this. I laid the journal page flat in front of them. No one touched it. But all three of them looked at it, at the blue handwriting in the margin, at the sentence my mother had written inside my private thoughts. You've always been dramatic when you're tired. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the refrigerator humming behind me. When I finally spoke again, my voice was calm enough to scare even me. You didn't help me, I said. You monitored me. You interfered with my job. You interfered with my finances. You read my private journal, and then you all stood there and called it love. Mom started crying in earnest. Dad leaned forward, palms flat on the table. Now wait just a minute. No, I said. You wait. His face hardened. I kept going. I called Greg this afternoon. He confirmed you contacted my bank and tried to slow my financing until I came to my senses. So let's be very clear about where we are. This is no longer about casseroles or tidying or hurt feelings. This is about three adults making decisions about my home, my money, and my future without my consent. Greg looked at Dad then, quick and nervous, like maybe he regretted how much he'd let slip. Dad didn't look back at him. He looked at me, and for the first time all evening, he dropped the gentle father voice. We were trying to stop you from making a mistake. There it was. Not apology, not remorse, permission, as if the only thing he'd done wrong was fail. I nodded once. Thank you, I said. That's the first honest thing anyone in this family has said all week. Mom's head snapped up. Tori, no, Mom, I need you to hear this part. I sat down across from them and slid the typed document forward. This is the timeline of every boundary violation I can currently prove. The dates you entered my house without permission, the mail you opened, the financial documents you accessed, the notes written on my mortgage paperwork, the journal entry, the bank interference. Dad stared at the stack. What exactly is this supposed to be? It's the reason I'm making this very simple for all of you. I took a breath. Then I gave them the terms. First, you do not come to this house again unless I specifically invite you. Second, you do not call my bank, my employer, my mortgage company, the post office, or any other institution connected to my life ever again. Third, if I find out any of you have used your relationship to me to access my records, my mail, or my home one more time, I will stop handling this as a family issue and start handling it as a legal one. That landed. Greg sat up straight. Mom went pale. Dad's eyes narrowed. Legal? He repeated. You're threatening your own family now? I'm telling you what happens if this continues. You would actually go to the police? Greg asked, like he couldn't decide whether to be angry or horrified. If I have to protect myself from my own family, yes. Mom put a hand over her mouth. Dad gave one short, disbelieving laugh. This is insane. No, I said. What's insane is opening your adult daughter's mail, reading her journal, and calling her bank because you don't like where she's moving. For a second, nobody spoke. Then my mother whispered, I never wanted it to go this far. I turned to her. You wrote in my journal. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I know. You looked at my mortgage statement and planned my life in the margins. I was scared. You don't get to be scared loudly enough to drown out my consent. That one broke something in her face. She dropped her eyes to the table and finally said the words I had needed from the beginning. I'm sorry. Not we were worried, not we meant well, just, I'm sorry. It didn't fix anything, but it was the first thing all week that wasn't wrapped in an excuse. My father stayed silent. Greg stared at the table. I looked at all three of them and realized something I probably should have understood years ago. An apology means very little when only one person in the room actually believes they did something wrong. So I reached into the drawer beside the table and pulled out 3 envelopes. Each one had a typed sheet inside. I slid one to each of them. Dad frowned. "What is this?" "A written copy of the boundaries I just gave you," I said, "so no one can pretend they were confused later." Greg actually blinked. "You printed rules for us?" "I printed proof that you were told." Dad didn't even open his. He pushed it back toward me with 2 fingers. "I'm not signing anything." I almost smiled. "I'm not asking you to sign it." His eyes lifted to mine. "I'm asking you to understand that whether you agree with my boundaries or not, they exist." Mom took hers with shaking hands. Greg folded his once and shoved it in his pocket without reading. Dad left his on the table. That told me everything I needed to know. I stood up. The meeting was over. "You need to go." Mom looked stunned. "Tori, after all this, you're just sending us home?" "Yes." Dad stood slowly, insult radiating off him in waves. "This is not how family handles things." I walked to the front door and opened it. "This family lost the right to decide that for me when you started forging access to my life." Greg got up first, avoiding my eyes. My mother paused in front of me like she wanted to hug me and knew better than to try. Her face looked smaller somehow, older. "I do love you," she said quietly. I believed her. That was part of the tragedy. "I know," I said, "but right now love isn't the problem. Control is." She cried harder at that, but she walked out. Dad was last. He stopped in the doorway and turned back toward me. "You're really willing to blow up your whole family over a job and a move?" I met his gaze without flinching. "No," I said. "You were willing to blow up your relationship with me over your need to manage my life. I'm just refusing to help you do it." He stared at me for a long second, then walked out without another word. I locked the door behind them, not because I was afraid they'd come back that night, because I needed to hear the click. The house went quiet again, but this time it wasn't staged quiet. It was mine. I went back to the kitchen table, gathered the papers into neat stacks, and sat down with my laptop. There was one more thing I needed to do before I slept. I opened a new email. To Human Resources, Tennessee Branch Housing Coordinator, and my bank's fraud department. Then I started writing the version of the truth that would exist outside my family. By midnight, I had changed every emergency contact on file, frozen the old mail access with the post office complaint, alerted my bank in writing that no one except me had permission to discuss my accounts, and scheduled a consultation with an attorney for Tuesday morning. Not because I wanted revenge, because for the first time in my life, I understood something simple and expensive. When people confuse love with ownership, you don't argue them out of it. You put it in writing. And the next morning, my father proved exactly why that mattered. He left me a voicemail at 6:14 a.m. He did not apologize. He said he had one last thing I needed to know before I embarrassed myself in Tennessee. And from the sound of his voice, whatever he was holding back was something he had expected would make me stay. My father's voicemail was waiting for me when I opened my eyes. 6:14 a.m., his name on the screen. His voice clipped and deliberate, the way it got when he wanted to sound reasonable while delivering a threat. "Tori, before you go making legal accusations and embarrassing yourself in Tennessee, there's something you need to know. Call me back. This affects your job." I sat up in bed so fast the blanket slid to the floor. For a second I just stared at the phone in my hand, listening to the message again, slower this time. "This affects your job, not I'm sorry. Not can we talk." A warning, a final move. I was out of bed before the voicemail ended. By the time the coffee maker started hissing in the kitchen, I was already at the table with my laptop open, legal pad beside me, replaying his exact wording and writing it down. Voicemail from Dad, 6:14 a.m. "Before you go making legal accusations and embarrassing yourself in Tennessee, this affects your job." I didn't call him back. I called the attorney first. Ruth Calloway's office opened at 8. I left a message with the receptionist saying I needed the earliest consultation available and that it involved family interference, open mail, financial tampering, and a potential threat tied to a new job. The receptionist's voice sharpened immediately at the word tampering, and she squeezed me in for 10:30. Then I called Renata. She picked up on the second ring. "Tori, everything okay?" I almost said yes out of habit. Instead, I looked at the page in front of me and made myself tell the truth cleanly. "No, I need to disclose something before anyone else tries to do it for me." There was a pause. "Go ahead." So I told her, not every humiliating detail, not the casseroles or the dish towels, or the fact that my mother had answered me inside my own journal like she was editing a manuscript. Just the facts that mattered outside my house. My parents had used a spare key to access my home while I was away. They had opened my certified offer letter. They had accessed private financial paperwork related to my move. I had reason to believe my father had contacted my bank to interfere with my financing. I had already changed my locks, filed a complaint with the post office, documented everything, and was meeting with an attorney that morning. And now, my father had left a voicemail suggesting he knew something that affected my job in Tennessee. When I finished, the line was quiet for one long second. Then Ranada said very calmly, "Do you have that voicemail saved?" "Yes." "Good, don't delete anything. Email it to yourself, send it to me, and forward me the written timeline you mentioned, right now." I blinked. "You still want the timeline?" "Tori," she said, and her voice had gone into the tone I'd heard her use exactly twice before, both times when someone in a closing tried to get cute with facts. "If someone connected to you is threatening to interfere with your employment before you've even started, I absolutely want the timeline." A strange rush of relief hit me so hard it almost hurt. "Okay. And for the record," she added, "whatever this is, it does not change my decision. You earned the role, but I need to know if I should expect a call from anyone pretending to speak on your behalf." I thought of my father's face the night before, the absolute certainty in it. The way he'd said this is not how family handles things, like he genuinely believed his authority outranked my adulthood. "Yes," I said. "I think you should." "Then send me everything. I'll alert HR and the branch director that no one except you is authorized to discuss your employment. And Tori?" "Yeah?" "If your father knows something about your job, the most likely explanation is that he's trying to invent leverage. Don't let him force you into a panicked response." I wrote that down too. Invent leverage, don't panic. After we hung up, I forwarded her the voicemail transcript, the documentation timeline, and a short note saying I would update her after I spoke to counsel. Then I showered, dressed, and drove to Ruth's office with my entire paper trail in a box on the passenger seat. Ruth Calloway's office was above a bakery and smelled faintly like cinnamon and toner. She was in her early 60s, silver hair twisted into a low knot, reading glasses perched halfway down her nose, and the kind of face that made you think of judges and school principals, and women who had never once mistaken politeness for weakness. She didn't waste time. "Tell me the clean version first," she said, opening a legal pad. "Then we'll get messy." So I did. I started with the spare key after the burst pipe, moved through the unannounced visits, the open mail, the job offer, the bank documents, the notes on my mortgage statement, the journal, the bank interference Greg had admitted to, the confrontation at my house, and finally the voicemail from my father. Ruth listened without interrupting, except to ask for dates. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and took off her glasses. "Well," she said, "your family's a nightmare." I laughed once. It came out shaky. "Can they actually get in trouble for this?" "Yes," she said simply, "potentially several kinds." She tapped her pen against the yellow pad. "Opening your mail is one issue. Accessing your home and private records without permission is another. Interfering with your banking or employment could become a third, depending on what we can prove. The journal is ugly, but mostly useful as evidence of pattern and intrusion. The key question is what your father thinks he has that affects your job." I pulled out my phone and played the voicemail for her. Ruth listened, then held out a hand. "May I?" I gave her the phone. She replayed it twice, expression unreadable. When she handed it back, she said, "My guess? He's either bluffing or he's already contacted someone tied to your employment." My stomach tightened. That's what Renata thinks too. Good, she sounds smart. Ruth flipped to a fresh page. Here's what we do. First, preserve everything, every voicemail, text, envelope, note, and photo. Second, do not call your father back unless I tell you to. Third, I'm drafting a formal cease and desist to your parents and your brother. It will instruct them to stop accessing your mail, your records, your employer, your financial institutions, and your home. It won't fix your family, but it will create a legal marker. If they ignore it after that, our options get stronger. I nodded. My hands were steadier than they had any right to be. And the job? Ruth looked at me over the rims of her glasses. The job is the least concerning part of this if your employer has half a brain. The bigger risk is that your father is counting on you being ashamed enough to keep this private while he uses the confusion to keep meddling. That landed because it was true. Shame had been their cover for years, not dramatic enough to report, too intimate to explain, too family-shaped to name cleanly. Ruth must have seen something change in my face because her own expression softened by half an inch. You are not required to protect people from the consequences of violating you just because they raised you. It wasn't a warm sentence. It wasn't supposed to be. It was a useful one. By the time I left her office, she had copies of everything and I had homework. Change every account password, remove my parents from every emergency or contact field I could find, alert my bank and employer in writing that no third party was authorized to discuss my information, send one single text to my family saying all future communication should be in writing. And under no circumstances meet my father alone, I sent the text from the parking lot. For the foreseeable future, all communication needs to be in writing. Do not contact my employer, bank, post office, mortgage lender, or anyone connected to my move. Do not come to my house. My attorney is advising me moving forward. Greg replied first. You got a lawyer? Are you serious? Then my mother. Tori, please don't do this. Your father was only trying to protect you. My father said nothing, not for 6 hours. At 4:40 that afternoon, an email hit my inbox from an address I didn't recognize at first. Then I saw the signature block. Mark Jensen, Senior Operations Director, Southeastern Escrow Group, Tennessee, my new company. My pulse kicked once, hard. I opened it. Tori, I wanted to make you aware that I received a call this morning from a man identifying himself as your father. He expressed serious concerns about your emotional stability, your readiness to relocate, and your ability to manage the branch role under pressure. He implied there were personal issues we should know before finalizing your transition. I told him employment matters would be discussed only with you, and I informed Renata immediately. She asked that I forward this to you for documentation. I stopped reading for a second and put the phone face down on my desk. Then I picked it back up and finished. For what it's worth, I found the call inappropriate and unprofessional, and it does not affect our decision. But I suspect you may want the record. There it was. My father's one last thing. Not some buried truth. Not some career-ending secret. Just a smear campaign in a new zip code. He had called my future employer and tried to make me sound unstable enough to second guess. I sat there very still for a full minute. Then I forwarded the email to Ruth. Subject line, he called my employer. Ruth called me before I even made it to the kitchen. Okay, she said without preamble. Now we're done being polite. I leaned against the counter. What does that mean? It means your father just did us a favor. I almost laughed. It felt inappropriate and perfect at the same time. He called my employer. Yes, she said. And unlike the casserole nonsense and the domestic boundary violations, this is clean, documented, professional harm attempted in writing by a third party who had no business contacting them. We're not asking anymore. We're instructing. By 7 that evening, Ruth had drafted a formal cease and desist letter to my parents and Greg. It was 6 pages long. It named the unauthorized entry, the open mail, the access to financial documents, the interference with banking, and now the attempted interference with employment. It instructed them to stop all direct and indirect contact with my employer, financial institutions, and service providers. It warned that any further conduct would be preserved for civil action and, where applicable, referred for criminal review. She sent me a copy before serving it. I read my own life in legal language and felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. because legal language has no room for, but we meant well. No room for casseroles or tears or the special emotional fog families use to make trespass sound tender. It just names the act, and the act, stripped of sentiment, looked exactly as ugly as it had felt. The letters went out by certified mail the next morning. All 3 of them had to sign. That part mattered to me more than it should have. By noon, my mother had left 2 voicemails crying. Greg sent a text saying I was humiliating the family. My father stayed silent until Friday. Friday, he showed up at my house, not alone, with my mother in the passenger seat and a banker's box in the back of his truck. I saw them through the front window and didn't open the door. Dad got out first. He looked older than he had on Tuesday, but no less certain of himself. He carried the box to the porch and set it down like a peace offering. Then he knocked, once, twice. I stayed where I was. Finally, he spoke through the door. "I brought your things." "My things." I waited. "You want to ruin your family over paperwork," he said, voice flat now, all the warmth burned off. "Fine, but before you decide I'm the villain, you should know what your mother found in your office wasn't the first reason we were worried." I closed my eyes for 1 second, not because I was scared, because I was tired. Then I opened them and stepped closer to the door, still locked, still between us. "What are you talking about?" He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice had changed, lower, sharper. "There's something about the Tennessee branch you don't know. Something I found out after Greg's friend looked into the company. If you won't open the door, then listen carefully." I put one hand on the deadbolt and didn't turn it. Outside on the porch, my father took a breath, and then he said the one name I had never heard before. The name of the woman who ran the branch before me, and the reason my family thought Tennessee was dangerous long before they ever touched my mail.